caterhamracer.com 420R Championship is sponsored by Just Add Lightness, high-performance LED lights for the Caterham 7, and by Design and Display Structures. Immerse yourself in worlds beyond with bespoke projection screens. And by Avon Tyres, the official tyre supplier of Caterham Motorsport. On road, on track, on Avons. Well, good evening everybody, and welcome back from what's been a little bit of our own summer break of sorts in the caterhamracer.com world. We're once again back behind the virtual wheel with some Caterham esports racing, and we're back at the circuit which is known as pretty much the Speed Bowl of Kent, the Brands Hatch Indy circuit, as we now move into the second half of this season, following the amended season calendar after everything that's been going on in the world as well. It is the 420R Championship in action, the fastest of the cars on the Caterham Motorsport ladder, and we've got quite an intriguing championship battle in store as we head to one of the shortest but fastest and most exciting circuits that we visit all season. Scott Woodwiss and Chris Hutchinson back in the commentary box once again. And Chris, first of all, it's nice to be back because we have had some real life racing recently in the last few weeks, as our 5 Caterham championships in real life have been out at Thruxton, where we had some mixed weather conditions, it's fair to say. We had some downpours and sunny conditions and almost just about everything in between. But now we head to a circuit that's very different to Thruxton, Brands Hatch Indy circuit, short, fast, still technical with some very daring corners. And given how it's been looking both in practice and in pre-qualifying, this is going to be possibly one of the most competitive fields we've had for a very long time.
Yeah, mirroring real life, Scott, wasn't it? It's the whole pre-qualifying field was sort of split by really just about half a second, and it looks like the gaps are going to be similar. You can see on the timings down the left-hand side that everyone's within a second, except for Michael's just getting up to speed there, setting his time. But yeah, really competitive, and like one or 2 tenths it really makes a difference on the grid. And Brands Hatch is a difficult place to pass at. So actually, the grid positions are quite important on this. But yeah, I was at Thruxton as well, and there was torrential downpour at times, wasn't it? It was very exciting for everyone.
Yeah, it was catching some drivers out, certainly, in many cases, but for some drivers it was mixing up the field a little bit, and in other championships it was pretty much the status quo. I think I'm looking at very much John Byrne in the 7 UK Championship in these 420R cars. It just seems that no matter what weather conditions or what circuit you throw at him, just no way of stopping him, so he continues that dominance. Speaking of championship points, we may as well have a quick look at what's going on in the championship standings coming into tonight's racing at Brands Hatch, and it's Steve McMaster, who took a double victory last time on the virtual version of Thruxton. He leads the way with 206 points, only 8 ahead of Jaroslav Cherny from the Czech Republic, and then it's a further 10-point gap to Christian Zaruta in 3rd. James Murphy, who I call Superman, is in 4th, ahead of Paul Ferdinand in 5th. The Belgian Emil Jaselenks is 6th, ahead of fellow countryman Tim Van Hee. Then it's Tom Willis, David Rowe, and Blair McConaughey rounds out the top 10. We've had 36 drivers that have all scored points so far, and we're going to get one more added onto the board, hopefully, because we do have a brand new driver tonight. Now, it's is it Mark or is it Martin Sempers? I have to remember.
Mark Sempers.
As Mark Sempers, excellent. So he's one of our latest drivers, and he is on the grid tonight, and he's gone straight into grid A for tonight's racing, which is great to see. So fantastic achievement from Mark, and hopefully he has a good evening's racing. So we are into qualifying as normal, as we see someone going for a spin just on Cooper Straight. At the moment, in the early stages, it is James Murphy on provisional pole, but only by one of the slimmest margins ever by his DPR Motorsport team boss, David Rowe, only 0.02 of a second quicker. And then Jaroslav Cherny in 3rd place, with Steve McMaster points leader in 4th, and Glenn McConaughey in 5th as well. So looking at the form book so far then, Chris, we've had a look at looking back at who's been winning races. Steve McMaster has 4 victories to Jaroslav Cherny's 2, and then in terms of podium finishes, they've been very evenly spread out between the likes of McMaster and Cherny, but also as well adding Christian Zaruta and James Murphy and a couple of others. It does mean as though we've got pretty much a definitive 4 drivers that are always at the front, but then 1 or 2 which, maybe because of bad fortunes here and there in some rounds, are a little bit lower in the standings, and possibly their talent and their pace in these races really does dictate or should suggest. Yeah,
absolutely. As season goes on, it ebbs and flows. The reminder to all drivers is that we've only had half the season, so it can all happen again, and if you've had some bad luck, obviously you might be due some good luck in the second half of the season. So yeah, we've definitely seen the top 4 be dominant. What we will start introducing into the championship tables is the drop scores situation, which is going to come into play towards the end of the season. So now after this round we'll probably start including that, because that will close things up even more. If we thought it was close already, that's going to really close things up, especially in the midfield, which is ultra competitive. Every place is really going to matter from now on.
And that drop score system is quite interesting, because it might benefit someone who's had an off race, maybe not performed as well as they could have done, but at the same time it can be a bit of a hindrance to somebody who always gets top results, because they have to drop more points, which then brings everyone else back in. And that's the beauty of it. Sometimes you do get Sampan Championships that do drop scores, and making sure that every single point you score counts, and means that it kind of mandates that everyone who wants to battle for the championship has to perform in every single race. Whereas you've got some other championships that do have a drop score of 1, or sometimes 2, or sometimes 3. And I know in real life championships in club races, they've reduced the number of scores they've got to either 0 or to 1, where they may have had 2 or 3 regularly, because of the fact we've got a condensed program and a condensed calendar of 3 or 4 or 5 events, depending on which championship or series that you're racing. So it is kind of a bit of a trade-off in terms of, obviously you want to score as many points as possible, but at the same time you've always got to have that thought in the back of your mind. We're thinking, if I'm so dominant, I know I've got to possibly drop more points than people around me, and if I possibly slip up in the last couple of rounds, it could either help or hinder me depending on the position I am in the points.
What I like about it is that it means that life doesn't have to get in the way of a race. You know, if you've got a difficult decision, even in sim racing or real world, you know, if you've got another life event happening, it means that you can be free of that. And if you happen to be able to attend every event, well, you just get to drop your 2 worst scores. Like you say, it can introduce some interesting things at the end of the season, but ultimately go out, race fast, and you'll do well nevertheless.
Well, I'm sure that'll be the end of everybody that is competing tonight. And looking at the qualifying standings so far, we've got 4.5 minutes to go, and still the top 3 remains the same, or top 4 in fact, and we're only separated by just over 1/10 of a second, with James Murphy still on provisional pole by the slimmest of margins from David Rowe. So it will be an all DPR Motorsport front row if it remains the same. And then Jaroslav Cherny in the mix as well. One driver who was doing actually quite well indeed, particularly in practice, I noticed, was Steve Arnell, and the fact that he's only just over 1/4 of a second off the whole position time certainly suggests, Chris, that either he's very much a fan of Brands Hatch circuit itself, or that he's been practicing quite a lot in the weeks we've been weeks gap that we've had since we last raced at Thruxton, which might suggest that possibly if he has been turning in some extra laps, he might have found a little bit extra pace that's kept him in touch with some of the leaders.
Yeah, I think Steve's always been there or thereabouts, just maybe lacking that last couple of tenths occasionally in the actual qualifying sessions. We've actually had quite a lot of races away from Caterham's. On the service we've been playing around with some other cars, and maybe that break is it's as good as a holiday. So it's just got back into the swing of things and hooked it up nicely with Brands Hatch.
Just working out possibly what his best score so far this season has been. I think it's been 6th position. He took a pair of them last time out at Thruxton, so he's kind of on par with his best performance. But if he can get a good start in the opening couple of laps and then potentially make up 1 or 2 places as a result of that, there's a decent chance, Chris, that given how close everything is and how we know momentum is quite strong around here, and that if you lose it, it's not just 1 place you could lose, it's 2, 3 or 4 in one fell swoop in the space of 1 or 2 corners. He could be in the plum seat if one of our regular drivers gets a little bit wrong and falls out of the train in the lead group and starts to fall back. He might find himself with possibly a personal best result if he plays his cards right and plays a bit of the patience game if he gets it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve's one of those drivers who's he's consistency based. So he, whatever his pace is, he can repeatedly get to that pace and just keep it there. Unfortunately, he's just been caught out a few times in our previous events with other people's incidents, basically. So yeah, it'd be good to see him get a good result tonight. So let's keep an eye on that one.
So just under 2.5 minutes to go then in this qualifying session. It's still showing to me as James Murphy is on provisional pole position, and I think my screen's frozen a bit, so I might have to very quickly reset mine just for a second.
Is Murphy out on top still from David Rowe, and then Cherny in 3rd, McMaster is still 4th, and Saruta's actually moved up to 5th, so he was running 8th early doors. Then that's Steve Arnell's just following behind with Blair McConaughey. Paul Ferniehoff might be a bit off his normal pace, actually. He's down in 8th place, and in pre-qualifying he was certainly a little bit higher than that. We got Tom Willis, James Wingfield, James Fowler, and then we've got Van Hee, Bennett, Steele, Curtis, Earlham, Sempers, and Kumar is just under a second off. So everyone is within that second. position. We're down to 1 minute and 28 seconds, so we've probably got 1, maybe 2 laps to go if we're lucky. But as we watch everyone coming, I'm just waiting for Scott to join back in the room again once he could click on.
I didn't want to. I'm back on. My screen's back on. I didn't want to break your flow of conversation. They're going through the grid. So one driver I'm pleased to see that's in the on grid B tonight appears to be Michael Kumar, because he's been doing pretty well in recent times in the grid B races. In fact, last time out there was a reference at Thruxton. He picked up 2 second places in the 420R races, and then picked up a win and a 3rd place in the Academy car. So he's certainly running pretty well. He is at the tail of the times, but even so, he's still less than a second off the provisional pole time set by James Murphy. And one thing that is quite interesting, Chris, is that that time it seems to be a means to an end in some cases, because unless I'm about to see someone pip it in the next 30 seconds or so, that very much is a benchmark which, apart from David Rowe getting 0.02 of a second, in terms of shy of it, no one else appears to be getting that much close to it. In terms of anyone is making moves, it's only by 1 or 2 places, by finding a couple of tenths. So it looks as though, unless we're going to see a mega last few laps in these sort of last 10-15 seconds, that grid looks fairly set to me in many cases. Although I say that, and Steve McMaster has just popped up to 3rd, so completely displacing any theory I had out the window. So because Jaroslav Cherny has just been displaced back down to 4th. So apart from that change, we'll see if anyone else can possibly make 1 or 2 last-minute moves if they can keep out of traffic, because a short circuit means trying to find a clear lap is always pretty tricky. Yeah,
we haven't actually seen much movement on the leaderboard all session. They sort of set their times early doors on probably new tyres, and haven't been able to match it all the way through the rest of the session. So clearly, everyone but getting their banker in and just not being able to better it. Here we see Michael Kumar coming in. I think a lot of people have actually abandoned this lap, but we'll keep an eye out for anyone who is going to make a go, because McMaster obviously made a movement last lap, so let's see whether he can improve again. Sharuta's made it up to 3rd place on that last second.
The line goes McMaster, and no, he's off by 0.3, so wasn't able to improve, but it does still mean that he will start from 4th on the grid. As you're absolutely right, Christian Sharuta has popped up to 3rd, so he's only 93,000ths of a second off this time, so he's been steadily moving his way up the table from 8th earlier in the session, then to 5th, and then getting himself onto the 2nd row of the grid alongside the points leader. So after the 15-minute qualifying session, there is your grid. It will reset in a second on the screen, and it's James Murphy, or Superman as I like to call him, starting on pole position by the narrowest of margins, 0.02 of a second from David Rowe in 2nd place. Then it's Christian Sharuta and Steve McMaster on the 2nd row. Christian with a great lap in one of his last few laps to put himself on the 2nd row. Jaroslav Cherny starts in 5th alongside an improved performance from Steve Arnell. Then it's Blair McConaughey who'll start alongside Paul Fernihuff on the 4th row. And then Tom Willis and James Wingfield make up the top 10. Outside, it's James Fowler in 11th from Tim Van Hee in 12th. Then it's Mark Bennett and Andy Steele, Alan Curtis and Jim Earlham. And then 2 relative newcomers to Grid A, which is Mark Sempers and his first appearance, and Michael Kumar in his first appearance in for a while after he's been competing in the Grid B races. So 2 15-minute races ahead for the fastest cars that Caterham Motorsport offer. Of course, there are 2 mods that have been put together by Benobro and also Jaroslav Cherny. Of course, Benobro's been putting together the skins and all the mods in many cases, and then Jaroslav has been the one that's been tweaking the physics, and that's been an ongoing project, hasn't it, Chris, in terms of making these cars better, because all the feedback from all these real Caterham drivers has actually been helping make the 2 mods, the Academy and the 420R, even more realistic and more true to life than it was originally, because you've got this really is very much a proving ground for how these cars feel, because it's giving so much invaluable data and feedback from real world Caterham racing drivers to make them even closer to the real thing that they race on the racetracks.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to feed back all the time now. It's obviously, as Cherny's racing as well as trying to do these things, that we're looking to have even more improvements for future seasons. So keep an eye out for that. We're hopeful we're going to keep moving forward and really make some more strides with the models. And these models are available for people if you want to play with the Caterhams. You can have, if you've got a Assetto Corsa on your PC, you can download the mods and off you go. There's no cost or anything. And then if you're really good, why not try and get involved in the actual racing?
Yep, and then if you do decide to have a go, you will have to go through a virtual ARDS test, which is pretty much proof to Chris that you can handle these cars properly and with some relative decent skill, and once you have passed that, you'll be able to then start competing to pre-qualify for either the Academy or 420R races, and then who knows, if you're quick enough, you might even find yourself in the top 18 to be on one of these grids on the live broadcast. But that's what we have coming up right now. We've got our grid formed up and all set and ready to go. You'll know when the race is about to start because the 6 red lights will appear in the middle of the screen. So James Murphy on the inside of the front row on pole position in the black and orange Caterham number 3. Alongside him is the team boss from DPR, David Rowe. It's a DPR 123 in fact, because Christian Zaruta will start third. Then it's Steve McMaster, points leader in fourth. He's got some work to do to try and maintain his lead, because he has only got a slim margin of 8 points from Jaroslav Czerny, and Christian Zaruta starting ahead of him as well. So third, fourth and fifth for the 3 main championship contenders. But I wonder if James Murphy and David Rowe, or anyone else around them, can possibly take something from them. Let's find out. Here comes the first of 15-minute races here in the 420R Championship for caterhamracer.com. The red lights go out any second now, and we are underway. It looks like a fairly clean start from everyone involved on the sprint down towards Paddock Hill Bend, one of the most daunting corners in British motorsport as it plunges downhill. As they sweep in, that's sideways for Christian Zaruta. I think he got tagged by Czerny. How on earth he held that, I'm not sure. He held up Czerny. Round the outside goes McMaster, and through it all into what is now third and fourth goes Steve McMaster and Blair McConaughey. Side by side between Steve Arnell and that was south of Czerny, and both Czerny's gone around. More contact with Zaruta. There's more contact in the midfield as well. And we were hoping for a clean start, Chris, but after the first couple of corners, it's all kicked off in the mid-pack.
It certainly did. A lot of cars also all wanting to be on the same bit of tarmac, and just those little love taps in the wheels, it just sent some people spinning. Christian Zaruta did get tagged into turn 1 by Czerny, and subsequently he actually tapped at the inside. I think it was Blair McConaughey round Druids, and that's what caused the secondary accident, and all heck broke loose after that.
Yeah, so Zaruta's now been dropped down to 14th place. The leaders come across the line to end lap 1 with the DPR duo of Murphy and Rowe, 0.6 of a second between them. Then it's McMaster up to third, and the crucial thing is he is way ahead of both of his championship rivals, because Czerny's down to 9th after that contact, Zaruta down to 14th, and unfortunately it took Blair McConaughey with him as well. He's down in 14th position as they swap places. So at the end of the first lap, it's McMaster up to third. Steve Arnell, I did say if he gets involved in contact, he might benefit. There's more contact going on towards the rear. I think that was Mark Bennett getting involved with, unfortunately, Christian Zaruta, who, as we said, came in third in points. He's now finding himself towards the end of the tail end of the field, battling amongst drivers he probably feels he shouldn't need to. Here's James Wingfield, who has really benefited from all of that, as have the likes of Tim Van Heen and also James Fowler. But the big one, we seem to have bigged him up in the right way, Chris, because Steve Arnell took full advantage of what was going on with the leaders, and he's up to 4th place with quite a comfortable cushion to Wingfield back in 5th.
Yep, he can pay us the bribe money a little bit later. We'll always accept that. Doing very well out of that first bit. Again, like I said, that consistency really counting. And we've got this sort of breakaway little group. So we've got James Murphy out front, but Dave Rowe has definitely not let him go. McMaster just sitting there watching, and then Arnell's got his little bit of comfort gap around him, got a bit of gap in front and behind, so he should be feeling relatively comfortable in his 4th place right now. We saw that behind, Zaruta was getting a little bit desperate, wasn't he? He was dropping a bit further back. He knows that the championship is quite he's up for stakes, and now he's got a lot of work to do.
In the timing tower, Jim Ellam's dropped down to last position, so he's dropped behind both Mike Coomber and Mark Sempers. So whatever's happened to Jim has put him to the tail of the field. Across the line come the 2 DPR boys. Murphy still ahead of Rowe as they go on to their 3rd lap. And they turn in. Now we've got side-by-side action here between Wingfield on the inside line from the Belgian Tim Vanny, who takes that high, wide and handsome line, as Brian Jones would quote here at Brands Hatch. It's not quite working. Couldn't carry the momentum through the corner, and all that's done is given the momentum to James Fowler behind in 7th place as they turn their way through Druids at the top of the hill through 180 degrees, and then they plunge downhill on the short sprint towards Graham Hill Bend. It used to be one longer, faster corner back into about 1998, and they sharpened it up a little bit, and that's the layout we've had ever since. So they come back through Surtees and then through Clearways, McLaren, and then Clark Curve, just right at the top of the circuit, and they swing all the way back onto the Brabham Straight for another lap. And Wingfield's starting to pull away a little bit here, and it looks as though that outside move, ever since he tried the outside move up at Paddock Hill Bend, Chris, Vanny seems to have lost a little bit of pace, and it's cost him a couple of car lengths. He's starting to come back to him a little bit under brakes here. And as I say that, I possibly curse Wingfield. He runs deep, gets very lucky not to run too deep, run off straight into the gravel trap, and he loses one place and could be in danger of losing two. As up the inside goes James Fowler. Wingfield tries to close the door, but the pair will go side by side on the exit, and with better traction of it, James Wingfield loses up another place. So what do I know, because Tim Van Hee was looking as though he was losing car lengths, and all of a sudden he's up another spot, and so is James Fowler. It
all changes so quickly, doesn't it? Van Hee's lost his racing buddy, so we often see him racing around with Giselle, don't we? But he's not able to join us tonight. He's on his holidays. But yeah, looks like Wingfield and Fowler have decided to join in instead, although at the moment that mistake by Wingfield has cost them a bit, and they'll be now working to get the momentum back to catch up with Van Hee once more.
So just back out with the leaders, new personal best for James Murphy. Gap is now 0.6 per second, but Steve McMaster is trying to close up with them. And I have to say the gaps are looking pretty even between the top four, because it's roughly 6 or 7 tenths of a second between the top four. They're all in shot as they head into Graham Hill Bend now for another time. Just careful on the track limits there, although thankfully this time they haven't got to worry about Dr. Palmer's grass this time, because it is virtual, so he's not going to hit them with a hefty bill if they start leaving tyre marks on it. Coming up through Clark Curve, and Murphy looks like he's got this under control, but it's never certain until we get to the checkered flag. We've just gone past 1/3 distance, and David Rowe trying to keep in touch with his DPR teammate. Across the line they come again. Still Murphy from Rowe, both with personal bests that time, but it was Murphy who was a fraction quicker. And then it's McMaster who is 2 seconds away. We've got a couple more personal bests down the order as well. We've got Fowler and Wingfield setting faster times. This is also Andy Steele and Tom Willis. And Fowler, in fact, has lost out to Tim Van Hee. So a mishap into Paddock Hill Bend has given Fowler another place now. Or at least Van Hee's got back through. I think there must have been a bit of a skirmish between them.
I think Fowler got through actually on the end of the last lap, but maybe just carried a bit too much momentum into Paddock Hill, which then allowed Van Hee back through. But it's all closed up, like again, just like it does in real life. It's all these little clumps of Caterhams all fighting away.
Yep, they're in little private battle as they go on. Also, there's Stitsy side by side behind between Andy Steele and Jaroslav Cherny by the looks of it, and good job we caught that, because Cherny was trying to go through, almost elbows Andy Steele wide, and it may have been too late for Cherny. Got very sideways in the middle of there through Clark Curve, but he's still going sideways on the power as he tries to get himself onto the Jack Brabham straights. But it seems as though he's got enough traction to keep Andy Steele at bay. We're right on board with Andy, 9th position. And just behind will be Paul Fernhoff, and there's a bit of a gap battling here. Switch for 10th or 11th, yeah, between Fernhoff and Tom Willis. And not too far behind them is Blair McConaughey and then Christian Zaruta, and they're in the pack as well. You see Willis now getting back up the inside of Fernhoff, the two of them doing the elegant dance of Caterham overtaking. And now once more Willis is back in front, and Christian Zaruta is right on their tail, as is Blair McConaughey, and Fernhoff runs out wide. We'll have to be careful he doesn't cut into the path of McConaughey as he comes back onto the track, which he doesn't manage to do, and thankfully McConaughey manages to slip past. And is Fernhoff going to possibly lose more momentum? And it's like we said before, you make one small mistake, particularly at a circuit like this in cars like these, and it's not just one place you lose, Chris, it's 2 or 3 in quick succession. Yeah,
it's such a momentum track, you know, and there's one train of cars, but as soon as one car gets off the speed, it just causes an absolute concertina. And this is basically the fast guys got caught out early doors trying to catch back up through the field, and just Brands, Paul Fernhoff loses it to the inside of Paddock. That's such an easy spin to make in real life as well. But it looks like his race is now even more disturbed. But Cherny is making the best job of this. We've seen Christian and Paul both suffer through the field, but Cherny, with his sideways antics, seems to be accelerating up, and he's going to be looking now forward to catching up with James Fowler and Wingfield, the battle we've been watching quite a lot of this race.
Just looking back towards the front, I've noticed that the gap between second and third has closed up now, because it was about 0.6 of a second, but now it seems as though David Rowe is maybe coming under threat here from Steve McMaster if he's not careful, although there might be just individual gaps in between. So it's actually 1.1. I thought it was a cumulative gap, so forget me. But even so, top three looking pretty close together. About 1.7 seconds separates them, and it just seems as though that Murphy has just about enough pace to keep Rowe at bay in this particular race. Here's Tim Van Hee in 5th. He's managed to pull away from the battles he was having for 5th, 6th and 7th, because he has now got in the mix there Wingfield. Then we just see now rest of the top 10 making its way through Graham Hill Bend. This is Blair McConaughey scrapping away with Tom Willis. These two, of course, with bosom chums battling in the academy, as we've mentioned several times, and they're also doing it again in the road sport ranks at Thruxton, and they're once again going back and forth, and then they can resume those battles. They
are never knowingly more than a car's width apart, are they? In the sim racing and in real life, their battle goes on race long, no matter where we are, and it's great to see.
It's very true. Wherever you find one, you usually find the other, whether it's in the real tracks or on the sim world. And now we see we're trying to go down the outside in a two-make contact. I think that was possibly unintentional. I think they simply just came together whilst Woodwiss was trying to go around the outside. McConaughey tries to take his own racing line and possibly didn't realise too much that Woodwiss was there, or we may have done and got a bit cheeky. But either way, looks like Woodwiss has to sit back another day, and it's McConaughey that's got the on-track advantage, and they're still both of them trying to keep pace with 9th place man Andy Steele. A little wide there from McConaughey as Woodwiss carries a bit more momentum, starts to get a small toe on the approach to Surtees. Now they flick through the left, continue climbing uphill through clearways. McLaren right at the top of this sequence of right-handers, right at the top of the crest, and back down the hill, and actually a good run off the corner is going to give Blair McConaughey a strong run for the possibility of a toe on the sprint towards paddock. It's that magical margin of just under half a second that gets you closer in the toe. As we go on board with Blair, I think someone's run a little wide just in front. There was a bit of tyre or sand trap dust or tyre smoke as someone locked up or went wide. And now trying to get the undercut here is Tom Willis, but the pair of them are going to be careful because here comes Christian Zaruta in 12th position, and they're all closed up again behind Andy Steele. And I wonder possibly that with this pace that McConaughey's trying to set to get past Andy Steele, whether or not Andy, not to be disingenuous, is being a bit of the cork in the bottle here, because as McConaughey tries to close in and pass on him, he's holding up Willis, which in turn is holding up McConaughey as he sends it up the inside. He must have been listening because Andy Steele's off into the gravel. Now looking up the inside is Tom Willis, and they both make contact. They collect Christian Zaruta. Both can still somehow keep going. Ironically, they've let both their rivals in front. They let Andy Steele back through, and Christian Zaruta just laughing to himself, passing 3 cars in 1 lap, and he hardly made an overtake.
I think that's almost justice served there. I think Blair's move was very ambitious up the inside of Andy. It was never going to work, and he actually sent him flying off into the gravel. So the fact that Andy did make the most of that, other than Christian making an absolute Moses move, wasn't it? The seas parted in front of him for sure. But yeah, Andy back out in front where I think he actually deserves to be.
So we've now got 3 3/4 minutes to go in this first 2 15-minute races here at Brands Hatch Indy on the caterhamracer.com 420R Championships, and it's still James Murphy who leads the way from David Rowe and then Steve McMaster, the top 3 unchanged as they turn into Paddock Hill Bend once again. Not long to go, and the gap between them now is about 1.6 seconds as McMaster keeps the top 2 in sight. Little lock up there from Murphy as he turned his way through Druids. Now as they make the run down to Graham Hill and back up the straight through Surtees, and we'll see if James Murphy can possibly go on to collect what I think should potentially be it will be his first 420R win of the season. The closest he's come was a pair of second places at Thruxton, and before that it was 3rd at the previous rounds.
The race is just dangling there, isn't it? These 3 are just in that gap where, you know, one little mistake would suddenly close everything up and it would be a race for the finish, but they've just kept these sort of gaps. I'm wondering whether that's deliberate now or whether actually I don't know what I'm saying. They never deliberately do that. They always want to get involved. And we are seeing McMaster closing in over these last few laps.
He has. He's been biding his time and keeping it clean, and that's all he can really do to get himself in the mix. And he just needs to get himself inside that half a second margin. We keep talking about it, particularly on this Assetto Corsa here with these cars. It's that magical half a second that you need to be within of the car in front to start getting the advantage of the toe. And of course, these cars are pretty unaerodynamic, which means that when you do catch the toe, it's pretty strong and it comes on all at once. So you've got to try and make the most of it once you've got it. 2 minutes to go then, and it's still Murphy from Rowe. I think we'll have a bit of a skirmish behind someone's locked up. It might be Christian Zaruta, who, again, is probably laughing to himself on his own in 9th place. But this tussle that's going on for 6th between Fowler, Cerny and Wingfield, and looks like Fowler runs a little wide as the intimidation tactics there from Cerny are starting to take effect as we head down the pit straight. 2 more laps to go, roughly, or so, maybe 3. Back into Paddock Hill Bend. Cerny takes the wide entry, trying to get the undercut, but look at that. Fowler was parking the car right on the apex to try and deny Cerny right up the inside. But even so, Cerny kept enough momentum, tried to squeeze up the inside and just found his nose chopped off there. And that now brings Wingfield back into place. The three of them all scrap over what is the final top 6 place. And Shirley knows he has to get past as quickly as possible because, of course, he will be losing points to his 2 championship rivals around him, of course. Well, he's gaining points on Giruta. He's 2 points ahead, but more crucially, Steve McMaster up in 3rd will try and extend that margin as much as he can, being in front. And Shirley knows it, and that was again rather ambitious. And unfortunately, once again, that's James Fowler almost finding himself in the gravel. Up the inside goes Wingfield. That was a bit ambitious there from Shirley. I think there was possibly, Chris, a little bit of impatience there. Well, as we see now side by side, Wingfield getting back up the inside. But as we look back to the leaders, that looked to me, Chris, as if he was a bit impatient to get a couple more points to stop McMaster running away with it.
I think it was less clear-cut than the Blair McConaughey one. I think he had an overlap there, and it's hard to say whether he drifted wide at that point, but it was certainly a little more under control than the Blair's one, so we'll watch that back on replay at some point. But yeah, with 24 seconds to go, it looks like these 3 up front are going to settle for the order that they're in.
Yeah, they've got one more lap to head around the Brands Hatch Indy circuit, and as we've mentioned, unless there is a slip from anyone in this point, it looks as if it's fairly set in stone. But of course, we know what happens in caterhamracer.com racing. Anything can happen on the last lap, and to paraphrase Barry Walker, it usually does. So through Paddock Hill Bend, all clean and tidy for the moment, as we get the signal at the top of the screen that the leader is on the final lap. And David Rowe has pulled in a little bit more, but again, he's just not close enough. It looks pretty tight, but of course the timing gap on the left will show you that he is still about a second away or so. Out of Graham Hill Bend and on the run towards Surtees, it's been pretty uneventful at the front, plenty going on in the mid pack and towards the rear. But for James Murphy, he can pretty much claim what this will be a fairly trouble-free lights to flag victory as he turns his way out of Clark Curve and onto the pit straight, and after picking up 2 second places, and finally he can hit the top step in a 420R race. James Murphy heads to the checkered flag and picks up his first caterhamracer.com 420R championship win here at Brands Hatch in race 1. It's a DPR 1-2 with David Rowe in 2nd place, and then Steve McMaster taking more valuable points in 3rd place for his championship chances. 4th for Steve Arnell. We told you he might get a top 5, and he certainly did, taking advantage of the mishaps of cars around him. 5th for Tim Van Heat, 6th for Jaroslav Cherny. That will be crucial for him to try and keep the gap as tight as possible to McMaster. 7th place for James Wingfield. It's 8th place for James Fowler, 9th for Christian Zaruta, and then 10th for Andy Steele, followed by the rest of the field coming pouring past the checkered flag. It's 11th for McConaughey, and then Fernerhuff in 12th, and the rest of the field will come through to complete the race. And that was, I think, in typical fashion, Chris, a fairly eventful race, but not so much for the front runners. They knew exactly what they had to do, kept it calm, kept it clean, and got the result they wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And for as easy as that looked from the outside, I think it's worth saying, I'm sure it didn't feel like that for the drivers when they were out on track. It's the concentration you need, especially around a track. This never relents. You never really have a long straight. Even the back straight is it's curved, isn't it, all the way? So yeah, it's hard work in real life and in the sim equally so. But yeah, so as easy as that looked, it wouldn't have been from the driving seat, but a great controlled race by Murphy there.
Absolutely, and there is confirmation of the result on screen. James Murphy with his first 420R win, taking it by almost 9/10 of a second from David Rowe in 2nd place. And Steve McMaster, again, maintaining his championship lead heading into the 2nd race with 3rd and the final step on the podium. Steve Arnell picks up his best result in 4th alongside Tim Van Heet in 5th. And Jaroslav Cherny, after his early contact with Christian Zaruta, manages to climb back up to 6th from James Wingfield and James Fowler. Christian Zaruta, again, had to do some work up the field, but he managed to pick up 9th and, by looks of things, the fastest lap of the race, which is pretty impressive. And it's Andy Steele rounding out the top 10. And the rest of the field comes through as Blair McConaughey in 11th, Paul Fernerhuff in 12th, Tom Willis, who might have thought he could have got a bit more in 13th place. Mark Sempers with an impressive first night of racing so far, 14th for him after he started towards the back. Then it's Alan Curtis, Mark Bennett, Jim Earlham, and then Michael Kumar finishing off the 18 finishes. So a race where all 18 cars started and all of them made the flag. So heading into the 2nd race, once again the grid is set by the results of race number 1. So that means that is your grid on the screen right there. So Murphy and Rowe will be back on the front row again. But what do you think were the main things we could take away from that race, Chris, that we might see in the 2nd race? Of course, Murphy and Rowe will be on the front row again, so they are expected favourites for the victory. McMaster is a bit higher on the grid this time in 3rd place. He's got a possible opportunity to maybe get a good start, starting on the same side as pole position. You've got Jaroslav Cherny starting back in 6th. Christian Zaruta's got some work to do, not being as high this time in 9th. So we might see a couple of trying drives here. But usually towards the front of races, Chris, whoever starts at the front typically tends to hold on to those first couple of positions, and it's those cars behind who are battling for the top 5 and 10 positions that tend to do the most position swapping throughout the race. We don't usually tend to see the lead change that much, if at all, from the first couple of positions. It's usually further back where we see plenty of position swapping.
Yeah, it's easier to manage the situation when you're out front with everyone behind you, and it's just the speed you lose sort of midfield, and we saw everyone, the pack is so close in speed, and it just, the overlaps that happen just mean that there's more variables and more reason to crash, really. We saw Cherney make the best of a bad deal at the front there. He did tag Christian, and that sort of started the whole series of events off, but he made his way back through the field a lot better than some. Christian only making it to 9th, and Fernerhoff even behind that. So I would watch Cherney. I think he is on the way back through, but like you say, I expect to see the front three here actually disappear off and make it a solid front again. But you never know, if without those incidents in the mid pack, if somehow they all manage to behave themselves this time, we could well see the battles racing a bit deeper into this race this time.
Well, it's always a possibility, and we'll have to see if the likes of Cherney and Zaruta can make their way up through the order from 6th and 9th respectively. They have got quite a bit of work to do, but of course they'll all be up to the challenge as best as possible. But it is the same front row as for race 1. Race winner James Murphy on the front row of the grid. Alongside him is David Rowe, his team boss Steve McMaster, with a great chance of possibly getting himself a couple of positions higher if he can get a good start. And then of course watch for Steve Arnell, 4th place on the grid. And again, he was ever the opportunity in race 1. It could happen again if anything happens at the front runners, and that is quite a dubious thing to say, but we'll have to wait and see. But the prophecy came true in race 1. Let's see if it can be again. So we are all set for the second 15-minute race of the evening for our 420R competitors. All 18 cars lined up on the grid. And typically I've seen in real life that the outside line is a flatter surface. It might be easy to get away from, but we will see. Here come the red lights one by one as we get set for our second 420R race of the evening. The revs rise. All 6 lights are on. They go out any second now. And again, pretty comfortable start from Murphy. A little bit of wheel spin from pole, but he seems to have got away trouble-free for the most part as they head back down towards Paddock Hill Bend for the first time. Rose swings in 2nd place, and a cracking start from Jaroslav Cherney. He's up from 6th to 4th, so he's already made up 2 spots from the 3rd row of the grid up into a possible podium place nearly. He's got past both Tim Van Hee and Steve Arnell, who see Van Hee going past Arnell to pick up a position into 5th. Steve Arnell's down to 6th now, and James Wingfield with a strong start. Zaruta's up 1 spot to 8th, and then McConaughey is making some position swapping in the mid-pack as well, with Fernerhoff and Steele going side by side. But I think what was crucial on that one, Chris, as we see the 2 main championship contenders nose to tail in 3rd and 4th, is that Cherney made the start he really needed to, and he's up with the leading pack, trouble-free this time, no contact, and straight onto the back of McMaster with a chance to pass here before the first lap is done. Yeah,
he made an absolutely great start, and just, again, found a little route through with that first corner where everyone else was a little bit wider. He went down the inside, and now he's down the inside of McMaster as well. What a great start to this race. So that was 5th to 3rd. Ooh, we've got Wingfield there going off wide. Looks like James Fowler had an incident with him there. Hold your breath as we go into Druids for the second time.
They'll be close. There'll have a lock up there for McMaster, but he has held on to 4th position, and he is coming under a little bit of threat now from Tim Van Hee in 5th. Steve Arnell 6th, and it's Zaruta up to 7th now, so he's up another spot, getting past Blair McConaughey from James Fowler and then Paul Fernerhoff. Tom Willis also hasn't really made much progress from 11th. Mark Bennett's back down in 12th, but also Mark Sempers has held his position from where he started. And then moving from the back of the grid is also Mike Coomber, because he's up 3 spots from the back in 18th up to 15th spot, getting ahead of James Wingfield, who appears to have hit strife in those opening couple of laps. He started in the top 10 and he's back down to 16th place, side by side for 3rd, as Murphy sets the fastest lap of the first flying lap of the race. You can see now McMaster trying to get the undercut here. Was one car running wide. That was James Fowler, losing 2 spots to then Steve Arnell and then Blair McConaughey. I think also as well Zaruta got past 2 in one fell swoop. He got past Arnell and then got past Fernerhoff as McConaughey was losing places. So Zaruta's certainly getting a move on, and soon we're going to have the 3 championship contenders all together, but not if Tim Van's got anything to say about it. He's trying to squeeze up the inside as we see McMaster got a little too close to the back of Cherney's car, exiting Graham Hill. This now puts Van Hee onto his rear roll cage, and Zaruta's also there to pounce as well as they head through clearways, up through Clark Curve and back through McLaren. through McLaren and then Clark Curve, I should say. And up onto the Jack Brabham straight, and here's the crucial part as well, Chris, in the toe toward Paddock Hill Bend. And he's lining up for a pass, but Zaruta is possibly keeping a prime position to take advantage of these two come to blows.
McMaster only offered him the outside there. We've seen the outside is really slippy when you get out there, and actually it looks like Zaruta might make the best of a bad job there, because Van Hee being left out to dry, so he's going to take the inside line. We see McMaster lock up into Druids quite a lot, and actually that's a little weakness because he does leave the inside open at that point, so maybe we'll see Zaruta make use of that. But all the top runners are making their way through, although Zaruta's a bit slow out the corner. He's made it stick, so good for him.
Yeah, so the three championship contenders are now together on track, 3rd, 4th and 5th, but it is still James Murphy who leads the way now. A slightly more comfortable gap this time. He's got a gap of about 7 or 8 tenths so far as he turns his way onto the pit straight to complete another lap. And we've now got Tim Van Hee on the tail of the Zaruta. Here's the onboard view from the Belgium, up through the sequential gearbox on the tail of the Brawn GP Specialist, I like to call it. He's looking to try and go to the outside. He's trying to force Zaruta to go defensive to get the slower line through Paddock Hill Bend, for him to run wide on the exit to get that undercut, but Zaruta was able to hold the momentum. Now they head up the hill and into the braking zone. Behind, looks to be, I think there's a switch there for 7th. McConaughey makes it past Steve Arnell. So unfortunately for Steve, Chris, he started so high in 4th. Oops, and there's contact in the background. And one of the cars involved was Tom Willis, I think. So was Mark Bennett. A couple of cars coming hitting strife. There is Tom Willis. Mark Bennett's in front of him. We only caught the back end of that as I saw it in the background, so didn't see the start of it, sadly. But it looks as though that Tom Willis, after what looked like such a promising start in race 1, it seemed to pretty much mostly gone downhill from there. Beaker going downhill, sadly. Steve Arnell running wide through the right-hand of Clark corner and losing another place, Chris, to James Fowler. It's not quite the second race he was hoping for. Absolutely
not. He has sort of been pushed off of the train. You know, he's pushed off line, which cuts your momentum, and it just means that in a pack like this, as soon as you've lost that momentum, it's really tricky to get back in your queue and take your rightful place. And he's looking like the inside of Druids, but that's going to be covered off by James there. Yeah, so it's just he had such a quiet race and actually did extremely well to keep ahead of the pack chasing behind in that last one. So it shows in clean air he's got that speed, but in this pack racing where some of the fast guys are still, see Paul Fernhouse still trying to make his way back up through the field after his race 1 where he got caught out and spun around. So yeah, he hasn't Steve hasn't got that pace necessarily, but he's got the consistency. But unfortunately, Brands is just seeing that one sort of him drop down the field because he's lost the momentum.
Yeah, as you say, it is that momentum loss, like we've talked about a couple of times before this evening, and it looks as though whatever momentum that Steve had in race 1, it's gone in race 2, and he's further losing it here because he's not careful. He might lose it around the outside. Speaking of which, look at that. We see James Fowler going round the outside of Blair McConaughey for 7th place, and I think he may have pulled it off unless Blair gets back up the inside into Druids, which he's tried, gets a little later on the brakes. They just rub wheels on the apex as they both run deep into Druids. That now brings, ironically, Steve Arnell and Paul Fernhouse back into the mix, as Arnell does hold on to 9th place, but he's really coming under pressure from Paul Fernhouse, and these 4 cars all together scrapping over 7th place. So it's now McConaughey, Fowler, then Arnell, then Fernhouse the order, up through Surtees, and all up there. And look at Fernhouse, he was right underneath Steve Arnell there, almost pushing him through the corner. I think he was almost on the verge of making contact and spinning him round, but thankfully Paul was able to anchor it up on the brakes quick enough to avoid contact. Meanwhile, with the leaders, just to quickly check in with them, gap is just almost a second now between Murphy and Rowe, so these two very much have it under control. But you have to say, Chris, it's not just those two at the front now, because these 3 here, the 3 main championship contenders of Cherney, McMaster and Zaruta, there's still just over half of the race to go, and they both know if either one of these 2 DPR cars in front slip up, any of them could be in like a shot to get a possible 2nd place or even higher if Murphy makes a mistake.
Yeah, Cherney made all that ground up early doors and got past McMaster, but I don't actually think he's quite got the pace tonight to just make his way back up onto the back end of David Rowe. So Rowe and Murphy definitely look like in the race conditions they've just got that little bit of extra speed that they need to protect themselves. But these 3 behind in 3rd, 4th and 5th just look like they're destined to come together in the last closing stages of this race.
It definitely does. We're coming up to half distance now as we see Cherney trying to close that gap, and a little wide there for McMaster if he comes under threat from Zaruta. Yeah, Zaruta's ever an opportunist. He will look for any kind of an opportunity to pass. As long as it's realistic, he will make a dive where he sees fit. Yeah, go on board with Christian. Race winner here in the past, I think it was last year in the 310R ranks. He had a one-off appearance at Brands Hatch and picked up the win in race 2. That was quite an emotional weekend for him. That was the first weekend he was back racing after the very sad loss of his father, and certainly paid tribute to him in a fine way. And he's certainly racing in a way I'm sure that his dad and Andy would be proud of. He's now just on the tail of McMaster. A little also tail slide there again from Shirley, just wiggling the tail as he got the throttle on exiting Clark Corner. Back across the pit straight now. Still the lead between the top two is holding station at 1.4 seconds this time now, so it's gone out a little bit now to James Murphy. So whatever the mistake David Rowe might have made initially, it looks as though it's possibly going back to benefit him in terms of the race lead. Still the scrap for 4th and 5th goes on between McMaster and Zaruta. And you have a feeling possibly, Chris, that McMaster's been able to hold on to pick up 4 wins, but Zaruta's put pressuring me in the way that you just feel maybe McMaster possibly might crack here if Zaruta keeps up this constant assault corner after corner, if he can try and find a way through. There
was half a chance into Druids on that last lap, and Zaruta did make a good attempt, but McMaster was able to just break that a little bit later and hold it off. But you're right, the pressure's all one way at the moment. It's definitely Christian pressuring Steve, and Steve's not close. He did a little dummy and goes up the inside of paddock. Can he make it stop? He does, and it was a great move. He's locked up though, but McMaster's back on the undercut and he got the inside for Druids.
This is why Christian has been battling for championships in Caterham Motorsport in the last few years. He's done it so many times. That's the reason they get a little tight as they go through Druids once again. They were side by side. They almost touched wheels. And now they come back down towards Graham Hill Bend, and it is Zaruta in front this time. So we did mention that relentless pressure had to possibly get to McMaster eventually, and it really did. He managed to really make that move up the inside that possibly set that move up for Druids. And now Zaruta in with a possible chance of getting himself a podium. Now he's got to not only try and get away from McMaster, but try and close that 1.2 second gap in to Cherney. He's got 2 options really, which is to try and go at it low wolf and try and close that gap in clear air, or he can start to say inadvertently to Steve McMaster, let's not battle too much, let's see if we can work together. I'm not sure that message is getting through just yet to McMaster if he tries to look for the undercut exiting Paddock Hill Bend, and he might guess it, but the momentum carried through turn 1 seems to be holding Zaruta in good stead as they come through Druids. But McMaster looks back up the outside again once more for that cut back on the run down to Graham Hill. So no change again from these two. But now, again, it has to wonder, Chris, if Zaruta can catch Cherney. Now has he got to decide whether he works together with McMaster to do it, but also he's running out of time with only 3 3/4 minutes left on the clock.
It takes 2 to tango, and yeah, it doesn't look like McMaster's going to do that tangoing, and Christian does actually have that extra pace. We saw him set fastest lap in the last race, so he does have that capability to close that gap, and I don't think it's going to be up to McMaster. A great move of experience by Christian. He did a great move up the inside of paddock. Obviously the switchback worked for McMaster, but then from the previous lap where he did a trial run, he did get at the last of the late breakers and made the move up the inside of Druids, which is the move that actually then has made it stick for at least a lap now.
It certainly has. I'm just seeing on the tower there the gap, so the ever-changing gap that's on the right-hand side. That's his gap to Cherney in front of him. Meanwhile, with this unruly mob behind scrapping over 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th, they still haven't finished, or at least James Fowler has, because he's checking out here in 7th position. We've sadly lost Mark Sempers by the looks of it, I'm afraid. So Mark Sempers in his first weekend, sadly, did get a decent finish in race 1 with I think it was 14th or 15th place, but sadly will not finish this second one due to whatever the issue may have been. Go back to our scrap now for 8th place between Blair McConaughey just in front, Paul Fernerhuff in the middle, and then Steve Ireland in 10th. And here comes with a great exit through Clark Corner, Paul Fernerhuff. He pulls alongside Blair McConaughey. Is he going to have his nose in front as they come across the line? It is McMaster by a nose across towards Paddock Hill Bend. Fernerhuff has got track position and the line he needs and swings through, or does he? Because it's a classic switchback move as McConaughey saw that coming. Swings back in front, and here comes up the inside Steve Arnell to relieve Paul Fernerhuff of another position. So after making one pass, Chris, he not only loses that place back, but he loses another one for comfort, and it's now from 8th. It was from 9th to 8th and then quickly back to 10th in quick succession.
It's such a, as soon as you try and make a move up front, make a move forward, you leave yourself open to losing that momentum and dropping back, and that's exactly what we saw there. It's why it's such a difficult decision. Do you sit there and continue the status quo, or do you make a move and risk losing a position?
Risking losing position, you have to agree that looking at the time, I've been keeping an eye on the top two for last couple of laps. One thing I have noticed, you can see visibly here, the gap that Murphy had, about 1.3 or 1.4 seconds, it's not that now. You can see we're on board with David Rowe, working away in the wheel of his black and green DPR machine. Of course, he'll be back at DPR HQ on his purpose-built sim rig, or the team's purpose-built sim rig, making the most of that and giving it a good run in as he chases after James Murphy, and he has been consistently quicker the last few laps. So I wonder possibly if either Murphy's tyres are overheating, or it's a small mistake that possibly has just affected Murphy's rhythm a little bit. He's just outside that crucial half a second gap, he needs to be within to get the toe, but he's getting pretty close on the run down the pit straight. He's running out of time though. He's only got roughly about 2, maybe 3 laps if he can go quick enough. He turns his way now through Paddock Hill Bend, and he is agonisingly close to that half a second as they dive up into the braking zone at Druid. It's still Cherney in third, but the gap really has come down also between Cherney and Zaruta. I said he was going to have the pace to do so, and also Chris, you're absolutely right, the gap has come down from what was about 1.3 seconds down to about 3/4. So let's see possibly if we could have a late position change here in what I think potentially could be the last couple of laps.
Cherney could still win this if the front two don't have a clean race. I mean, there's not many laps. You've seen that it can take 3 corners to make a pass stick. So if the front two get battling, Cherney is not out of this yet, and if Cherney's in it, then definitely these two behind are also still with that win chance. But it all depends at this moment whether David can pull that gap in.
What will also be crucial for David is that it's 2 second places at the moment, at least for him, and that will be some crucial points to him to see him shoot up a couple of places in the championship standings. He came into the weekend looking at the championship standings coming towards Brands Hatch. He entered 9th, and his best result was only a 3rd place. It was back at the opening couple of rounds at Alton Park, so this will now make it even better for him. He's gone 1 place higher. He can get the win. It's certainly possible, although looking at his timing now, he lost a couple of tenths on the last lap. He's trying to get it back on the exit of Graham Hill. He did get a better run off of the left-hander onto the Cooper Straight. And look at that, just looking at that sort of timer dancing between 7 tenths and 6 tenths, and then just over half a second. It's agonisingly close, but they are going to start the last lap of the race here. The time is going to tick down to about 10 seconds or so when they go across the line. Murphy heads across the line to start that final run of the 1.2 mile Brands Hatch Indy circuit. Into Paddock Hill Bend they go, and the gap has gone back out to roughly 8.5 tenths. Now it's back to 3/4. Let's see if possibly Rowe can use that technique to square the corner off. He takes a tighter run through Druids and does get a little closer.
Keep an eye on the battle behind, Scott.
Yeah, that's within half a second as well. That could be a sprint to the line for 3rd. And look how determined David Rowe is. He was very wide on the exit, which has got him right underneath James Murphy. We're going to have a photo finish for 1st and for 3rd here through the final couple of corners, and James Murphy is now under big pressure here as David Rowe's right underneath him. Now it's going to be the sprint to the checkered flag. He is in that half a second gap as they make the run towards the line. It's going to be a DPR victory, but which one will take it? It's either going to be Murphy or Rowe. They make the run to the line, and it will be Murphy just in front by just over 1/10 of a second. Rowe in 2nd place, and then it's Javislav Cherney who does beat Christian Zaruta to 4th. To 3rd place with Zaruta in 4th position, and then it's Steve McMaster in 5th. Tim Van He comes across the line in a lonely 6th. 7th for Fowler, and then side by side for 8th, and it's going to go to Fernehoff just by a matter of milliseconds from Blair McConaughey in 9th, and Steve Arnell rounds off the top 10. Rest of the field comes through, and that, Chris, could have been such a different result if David had managed to get a little bit closer, maybe a couple of corners earlier. I think it's almost certain if he'd had one more lap, is that classic phrase, one more lap, and he probably would have got him.
Yeah, I think probably James was thinking that. He took liberties coming out of Graham Hill Bend on that last lap, didn't he? Which caught him up and really gave us quite a spectacle over that last lap. But yes, one more lap maybe made all the difference in that case.
Done, but let's take a look at the winning margins then. So, at the end of tonight's 2 races, it's James Murphy who picks up the double as he collects another win and also gets the fastest lap to boot as well. And he wins by just over 1/10 of a second with David Rowe, his DPR team boss, right underneath his roll cage across the line. Jaroslav Cherney holds off Christian Zaruta, but more importantly finishes ahead of Zaruta and McMaster to claw some points back after they lost out in race 1. McMaster is indeed 5th from Tim Van He in 6th. Then it's James Fowler and Paul Ferderhuff with Blair McConaughey and Steve Arnell rounding out the top 10. 11th place for Mark Bennett. Then Michael Kumar with some great running up there to keep himself out of trouble to rise as high as 12th on one of his first weekends in Grid A. And it's James Wingfield from Tom Willis. Those two would have hoped for a bit more, but they got caught up in early incidents in this second race. Then it's Andy Steele from Alan Curtis, Jim Earlham, and we sadly lost Mark Sempers halfway through with some kind of possibly connection or technical issue. So, two very exciting races, and it's another winner to add to the list, or to the very small list in the 420R Championship. James Murphy becoming not only the third driver to win a race in the championship, but also the third man to take a double as well, but to win both races. And we haven't actually had, Chris, a race weekend where we've had a different driver win each race on the same night, because McMaster has won both races at both Alton Park and then Thruxton. It was Jaroslav Cherney picked up each at Cadwell Park. Now it's the same for Murphy. I guess the question's got to be, when and how are we going to get two different winners? Is it going to be possibly the same momentum when we get to the next round at Donington Park in a few weeks' time?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting sort of observation, isn't it? I hadn't really kind of noticed that. But yeah, when someone seems to dominate in the 420s, it seems like they managed to get it done for both races. So yeah, great stuff. And we've probably put scuppers on that. So whoever's going to win race one next time will probably get scuppered by commentator's curse at Donington. But nevertheless, yeah, great stuff. Cherney dropping right back in race one because of incidents, but made the best. And actually for championships reasons, that's a really good result in his second race. So like I say, pulling back points, not many, but it's every point going to count, like I said earlier. Paul Fernie had the speed in pre-qualification, but just issues all through that race. Did see him drop down the field. Like I say, Kumar having a great race, normally in the B grid, so to finish 12th on the A grid, what a great result. Did lose Mark Sempers, but he was far from put a good show, didn't he, in that race one, so good job there. It'll be interesting once I tot up all the championship points a little bit later, and they'll be up online tomorrow to see where we all at.
Absolutely. But I think before we do that, I think it's time for you once again to perform your best Martin Brundle impression and go and have a wander down the virtual pit lane and see who you can find to have a chat to. I imagine there'll be some front runners who'll be quite eager to talk about their evening. So with your virtual microphone, Chris, off you go, and let's see who we can find from tonight's races to see who wants to have a chat.
I think it's only fair that we try and get a double race winner, James Murphy, in here. So James, how are you feeling after that one?
Firstly, exhausted. Secondly, no, really happy. I've had many lovely weekends at Brands Hatch in my short real and sim career, and this is the best sim one. It was absolutely great. A lot of the work was done in quali. It's quite hard to attack when you're of a similar pace, and Dave drove brilliantly well, especially considering I don't think he's on a lot of sleep right now.
No, we'll maybe get David in to wish him congratulations for his new arrival. But yeah, I said to Scott from the outside that looked easy, but I imagine the concentration levels there were pretty off the scale.
Yeah, it's very intense track. There's no time to race. I'm sure you guys covered it in commentary. There's no time to rest here at Brands, and the straight's not a straight, and yeah. You're constantly checking the gap, and it's incredibly intense through all the corners actually. And notice there was no time to relax, and yeah, I'm not quite as tired as Dave at the end or at the beginning. But no, it was an effort to put it in, and yeah, really pleased with the result.
Nevertheless, yeah, first 420 win, and a great start to the second half of the season. And say we've got it all to do again in a couple of weeks, or in a few weeks' time. We'll have Donington up on the 420s.
And before then, the academy's back here at Brands, which
next week.
Very much looking forward to. Now, I think you should try and find Dave. There's a rumour he's trying to hide out and get a quick sleep in his sim room. So you boys should wake him up.
Let's go and see where. So thanks very much, James, and congratulations. Well done. All right. Well, I think we've built him up. Let's see whether David Rowe is awake and uncommunicative. How's it going, Dave? Oh, I can see he's in the room. Maybe really is too tired to talk. Have you got us, Dave?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Dave. Yeah.
Yes, I'm very well, thank you.
Feeling sleepy? Congratulations on the new arrival.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, all good so far. But yeah, I'm sure we've got some sleepless nights to come. That's for sure.
Yeah, so a kind of a solid race in second place for both those. Just didn't quite have enough to catch up, except for on the last lap, maybe a few liberties with Graham Hill there gave us an exciting finish on the second race.
Yeah, James is just super consistent. I mean, he made a few mistakes, but it was just not enough. And I kind of was probably playing it a little bit too gently, too easy. And then in the final few laps, that's when I decided to have a bit more of a go. But it was good. It was nice to actually finish a couple of races without any drama for once.
Yeah, the drama will happen behind you. If you ever go and watch back the stream, you'll see how much chaos there was a bit further back. But yeah, congratulations, well done, and I'll let you get back to important duties.
Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot.
There you go, Scott. 2 happy podiums.
I don't think we'd expect anything less, given these guys managed to get a 1-2 and a good run for DPR. So I'm sure they're always to be happy. And I want to also my congratulations to David and his good lady wife or partner for arriving at their latest child. It's always quite a stressful time, but I'm sure it's one they're enjoying every step of the way, regardless of how many sleepless nights they might be getting from their near arrival. So. In that case then, that is racing done and dusted. Another excellent 2 races once again for the caterhamracer.com 420R Championship. And of course we're not done with Brands Hatch just yet as we move on to what's coming up next, because of course we make another trip back once again for real life race week, because it's the turn of the Academy cars to head on track on the 22nd of September, once again at 8:30 in the British summertime, or at least we're getting close to the end of British summertime now, of course, as we now are getting towards October. And of course then the next action after that, once the real life race weekend is taking place at Brands Hatch on 26th and 27th of September, is we then start the build up to the run towards the end of the season. First stop being of course the fantastic Donington Park, which is where the 420R cars are once again going to be in action. That will be on the 6th of October once again at 8:30, and of course then again a week later for Donington Park real life race week for the Academy cars once more. But the Academy cars have still got Brands Hatch to get through and complete as well. So Chris, final thoughts from tonight's racing then. Of course another race winner to add to the 420R tally, and more so valuable points for the top 3, but it just seems as though that it was very little bit up, and even though they finished up there towards the front of the field, all 3 championship contenders had a little bit of mixed fortunes. But I think the person who possibly could be the most satisfied with his consistency arguably has to be Steve McMaster, because he wasn't the one that lost out positions in race 1. He managed to pick up a podium as a result of that. His rivals did catch up in race 2, but even so I think he could be happy with the haul of points that he's got with a 3rd and a 4th. That will certainly keep him in good stead heading towards Donington Park in a couple of weeks. Yeah,
he's got a little bit of a buffer, hasn't he? Had a safety buffer at the top of the championship, which is definitely good to take into the second half, and that's the reason why he can have a couple of I'm not going to call them bad results. I mean, he got a podium and a 5th or whatever it was, so or 6th. So they're not bad results by any means, but yeah, this gives him that little bit of comfort. Plus, like I said, we've got this drop scores to take into account, so he can even disregard this whole weekend if he comes back on form at Donington and starts dominating again.
We'll see if he can, and of course I'm sure the rest of the team will be back once more to do the same again. And so that wraps up tonight's coverage of the latest rounds of the caterhamracer.com 420R Championship racing tonight here, of course, as courtesy of our 3 sponsors, who before we round off we are going to give thanks to you once again, because as we mentioned at the beginning, the caterhamracer.com 420R Championship is of course sponsored by just Add Lightness, professional LED lights for the Caterham 7, by D&D, by Design Display Structures, immerse yourself in worlds beyond with Bespoke projection systems, and also by Avon Tyres, on road, on track, on Avons. They are the official tyre supplier of Caterham Motorsport and Caterham Cars indeed. From myself, Scott Woodwiss, and Chris Hutchinson, and all of us here in caterhamracer.com, thanks for watching, and catch us next week when it's the Academy Cars' turn to strut their stuff on the Indy circuit here at Brands Hatch. But for now, enjoy the rest of the week, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.